what for you does Pan-Africanism mean?
As Black people across the world, so not just on the African continent, but in Europe, in the US, in South America, there are Black communities, and there's something that links us together. That ancestry, that root has the potential to be so powerful in terms of making us stand up for the injustices that we face. In fact, quite a bit of my storytelling is around this, but I also do think that through arts, through music, through film, that people are reconnecting.
All right, you guys, let's get into first.
There is a movement promoting our stories, and many of us grew up with a strong craving for images we can relate to. Production teams, writers, creative heads have come together to tell stories, and this podcast is their voice. The themes covered are very relevant to the Black community, and anyone concerned by the social and racial injustices that are in place to stifle this voice. The Pan-African voice is not easily heard, and here we talk about our movies, that film or doc which you heard about but didn't get to see. What was the story? Where can I watch it? It now has a voice. Tune in. We walk you through these stories and interview the filmmakers. Welcome. Karibu sana. Karibu sana.
And starting right on the lens. Ready, and action.
You've all been sent here by the courts because they found that you have a problem with anger. And I'm here to help you learn how to deal with that anger. Are we together?
This is ridiculous. I'm surrounded by violent thugs.
Who are you calling a thug? Foma, who are you calling a thug?
Everybody, please, let's just calm down. Okay, let's calm down. Louis, I can see you stretch.
I walked right up to Bonnie's face, looked at him straight in the eye, and I gave him one correct slap and boom!
I was so angry, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a big stone, and before the officers could do anything, I grabbed it and threw it at her face.
Good God.
We try to live good lives, but the city spits us out every day like cockroaches.
Close your eyes. And now put the palms of your hands on your face and start massaging those creases out slowly.
Go back to your stupid little fights with your band of thieves and continue drinking your little chai in your garden. We don't want you here anyway.
Who the hell do you think you are talking to me like that?
You people have silenced us for long enough.
You people? You people?
Yes.
I am not you people.
Yes, you are.
Safe space, safe space. Remember what I said earlier? The therapy takes place in a very sacred and safe space, okay?
All right, we have another episode of the Pan-African Film Podcast, and we're talking to Maimouna Jallow. Is that the right way to pronounce your name?
Yep, Maimouna Jallow.
Maimouna Jallow, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast. And we're here to discuss your film, Tales of the Accidental City.
Yep, that's right.
So I'm going to give the audience just a little bit about what the storyline is without trying to give away too much. But this is very much an experimental film. You originally wrote it for the stage, and you chose the unusual format of a VC call. So not too dissimilar to what we're doing now, but it basically covers 4 residents of Nairobi, Kenya, where they share their stories with an anger management counselor. And as they share their stories of how they even ended up in this court-ordered session, they end up tackling really heavy subjects, which led to their rage, and are encouraged to replace the feeling with courage. So some of the themes this covers are anger and injustice and violence and ultimately like coping techniques, right? I don't know if you want to add anything else that I might have missed.
I think that at its core, it's a film about social justice, or rather social injustice. but also the stratification of cities like Nairobi. And although it's set in Nairobi, I often say that this could be any big African city. And the city is really a place where people go in search of their dreams. You know, there's always this promise when you move to a city that you're going to start a new life. And I think for each of these characters, whether they've come from their home villages or whether they were born in Nairobi, they're those who basically the city doesn't deliver the promise that they expect. So it's, in a sense, also a story of shattered dreams, but also a story of, I think, tremendous strength, because every single one of the characters, in telling their story to each other and to the counselor, I think basically reclaims a space for themselves.
Yeah. And then just to speak a little bit about yourself, Maimouna, it's so great that you've joined the podcast. We're so happy that you were so available and open to speak to us. You have a company called Positively African, which is a great name. And you're the writer and the director of Tales of the Accidental City. But I think your career was mostly centered on the actual theater stage, if I'm not mistaken. Do you want to just recap a little bit about yourself and what made you transition into film?
I always say I'm an accidental filmmaker and probably an accidental theater director as well. I'm actually a journalist by profession, and I worked as a producer for the BBC World Service for a few years. And then I transitioned into doing NGO communication. That's what actually took me to Nairobi in the first place, a short 3-year contract, and I ended up staying for 11 years. And for me, I think I've always been a lover of stories. So, you know, as a child, I wrote many stories. I loved proverbs and would write them out and stick them around my walls in my bedroom. So I've always loved stories. And I actually did a master's at SOAS in African literature, but somehow I never imagined that I could be doing something so closely related to what I had studied. So instead, I went down the path of journalism and communications. And it was whilst I was in Kenya, a mother to a young 3-year-old, that I started exploring stories again. And initially it was, I wanted to look for traditional African stories that I could share with him. I was looking in particular for Kenyan stories, seeing as this was our new home. And I had some trouble finding traditional stories. And that kind of started this whole exploration where I started interviewing people, including elderly people and storytellers, traditional storytellers, in an effort to basically create an archive of stories so that they wouldn't be lost, because a lot of the people who tell these stories and know these stories are already of an older generation. And that kind of piqued my interest in the performance space as well, because as I talked about the project, people would ask me to tell them stories. And my initial reaction was, I'm not a storyteller. I'm not a performer. I can't do that. But then I realized that I had to give it a go, you know, if it was so important for me to preserve this oral tradition that we have. And that somehow led to me adapting a novel for the stage and directing other women as they adapted stories, literally novels, for the stage. And the idea behind that was to create greater access to African literature through performance. We have a thriving industry, and there are amazing new books coming out all the time. And, you know, they have their readership, but I thought it would be wonderful to be able to present them to an audience in a new way and kind of reimagine this oral tradition that we have with contemporary texts. So that's how it started. And then the film was completely accidental. Again, it was a writing project with a group of friends in Nairobi. We wanted to explore the city 120 years after its so-called creation. And we wanted to do this through short stories. So there were 8 of us eventually who wrote short stories, and they were all so different. And, you know, I really loved all of them. And I asked some of the writers if I could first adapt them into an audio drama. And we recorded a 3-part, 90-minute version of Tales of the Accidental City. my intention after that was, to adapt it for the stage. And then COVID happened and I didn't want to let go of the project. And someone suggested, well, what would an anger management class look like, during these times of COVID? It would probably happen on a Zoom call. And that's when the light bulb went off. And I thought, okay, let's try this. We had a very small budget, so it's not like we could do some great cinematographic feat or anything like that. But it was just so interesting to see how this story developed into so many different forms, and I just feel that when a story wants to be told, it will find its way out.
That was actually one of my questions in sense of how did the idea come about of using an anger management class? So that was literally just brainstorming.
No, the anger management class, basically when I thought, okay, I want to stage this. So even before the film idea came along, I didn't want it to be a series of 4 monologues on stage. And I kept thinking, what is it that kind of links all these 4 characters together? What do they have in common? And that's when I started looking at them as these very angry and very frustrated characters. And that's when I got the idea to create the character of Counselor Rose, so that in them exposing what has happened to them, to her and to each other, we learn a lot more about their backstory, about their environment. Because for me, it was important that there was a conversation between them, not only to make it more interesting, but also because, like I mentioned earlier about this stratified society that we live in, how often do you get, the grandson of the former Nairobi city governor in the same room discussing issues with a domestic worker or with a young woman who sells Hawks bananas on the street. So it was really important because I thought that they could reveal a lot in the ways that they interacted with each other.
I thought it was very timely how you ended up using Zoom as everyone around the world was using it for school, work, and now for like a therapy class. It was smart to do, I think. And it was intriguing to watch. I've never seen a film be shot like that. But could you tell us a little bit more about the Humans of Nairobi collection?
So we were 8 writers, all of us friends. It started as a much bigger group, but as you know, with these things, life gets in the way and some people fall by the wayside. But in the end, 8 of us, stuck to the project. And at the time of writing, which was 2019, it was 120 years since, Nairobi emerged as a city. So Nairobi is, a swamp-like area. The Maasai people would pass by that area grazing their animals and stuff, but nobody lived permanently on this land until the British created the railroads. And then they needed workers to settle there. So it's kind of this accidental city. That's why it's called the accidental city, because it was never designed to be a city. And all of us, we have different lives in Nairobi, and we just thought it would be so interesting to look at sort of a cross-section of characters' lives and how the city responds to them today and how they respond to the city. So we had a very clear brief. But aside from that, everybody was completely free, to write from whatever perspective that they wanted to write from. So we would meet, sort of once a month, exchange what we had written, discuss the theme, give each other feedback on our writing. And it was actually a really beautiful process. And the idea initially was to publish these stories in an anthology. We haven't been able to do that, because in the same year that we finished our anthology, another anthology called Nairobi Noir, also stories based in Nairobi, came out. And unfortunately, it's a small market and we weren't able to get a publisher. So I'm really happy actually that these stories, at least some of them, have sort of survived in a new format and have a new life of their own.
Yeah, that makes sense. So was the entire performance scripted then? Because it just seemed so organic, and the actors you chose, that's kind of my first question. The second part to it is, were they stage or theater performers, the actors, or, it's just, I wanted to know a little bit about how that selection came about and how much of it was scripted.
So it was very scripted. I'm glad that it doesn't sound overly scripted.
Very organic, yeah.
But at the same time, I also, as director, told the actors that, to feel free to also add, accents here. And, if there was a line that felt more natural to be said in a different way. So yes, they had a script and we did a lot of rehearsals online. We actually only met the day before we started filming because of COVID. But yeah, and I think that each character really brought something of themselves. You can, I think, hear it in the way that they're so natural with these voices. And it was really a mix, Mercy Mutisia, who plays Jacinda, has done a lot of theater and I believe some television as well. Eddie Kimani, Louis Joroge, basically, he also has done film, television, and theater. And then we had people, like Tana Kyoko, who played young Sarah Obama, who had never, ever done any film or theater. We met at a theater workshop, which I believe was her first one, but I kind of fell in love with her energy. And so I invited her to come on board. And Martina Ayoro, for example, who plays Diana, she had done theater, but this was her first experience with film. And then Wakio Mzenge, Councillor Rose, she has quite a bit of experience in theater and film as well. So it was a mix. And what was really nice is that as a small team, everybody kind of gave each other tips and encouraged each other. And it was like a family. So it was 5 days together intensely because this was filmed on location, in one location over a 4-day period. So a day rehearsal and then 4 days of filming. And it was really a massive group effort. It was also my first time directing, so they were helping me out as well, when I wasn't sure what to say or, just little things like that. It was really, I think that's what's really beautiful about filmmaking, that it's a family affair. You all have to kind of have this same goal and objective for it to work and for it to come together, and including with, the director of photography and then later the editor.
I think it was very cleverly done in terms of the photography aspect for it to look so organic. But it's nice that you all bonded, because that definitely came across like it didn't look as scripted as you're saying it was.
And actually, one thing I forgot to say, because we did the audio drama first, so for the audio drama, I did a call out and I got about 250 applications for voices and then selected some of them to do the audio version. And then when I decided to do the film, I didn't want to change the actors, but some of them I thought, but they don't necessarily look like what I imagined them to look like. So somebody like Mercy Mutisia, who plays Jacinda, looked a lot younger than I imagined the character to be. But she owned it so well in the audio drama and then in the film that I was like, I'm not changing the cast. So most of the cast, 4 out of the 5, had done the audio drama version first. Only Wakio, Councillor Rose, came in last minute because the original Councillor Rose wasn't able to come. And she literally, received the script 2 days before, learnt it, and shot her scenes in an hour and a half. I have never seen anything like it. She is brilliant. Yeah.
Wow. Definitely a lot of talent out there then. That's definitely evident from your description of how this all played out.
Yeah.
But I'd like to hear more about sort of your shape-shifting journey for this project. How difficult was the evolution into the final film format?
Because it wasn't pre-planned, I didn't have to worry in advance. It kind of I just had to face things as they came along. And initially when COVID happened and I thought, oh no, we're not going to be able to stage this, I was quite devastated, because I'd worked a lot on adapting the audio drama into a stage script. But as soon as the idea for the film came about, well, I had to learn fast. Initially, I thought, oh, we'll just record it on a Zoom call like we're doing now, and then all my friends who are filmmakers said, you can't do that. The sound quality, the image quality won't be good enough. You have to record it, with cameras as though, it were a real film and then put all the Zoom effects in post-production. So, that was something that straight away, I had to think about, okay, can I afford a camera person? Can we do this with the $10,000 that we have? And then also, of course, when you're listening to audio, how the characters enter the space was completely different. So I had to adapt that to the fact that Counselor Rose is having them join a call online, so all the initial parts where it's letting the participants in, oh, and how are you and who are you? All of that, of course, had to be adapted in the script. And also things like, Martina Ayoro, who plays Diana, I was thinking, would this character have a laptop? She has just come from the village to the city. This doesn't come out so much in the film, but you realize this in the audio drama. She's running away from domestic violence. She's come to the city alone with a kid who gets kidnapped. Why would she have a laptop, So that's where I had to change it for her to, when she suddenly looks at the screen and says, oh, it's my sister's husband's laptop. I've never used it before, so that you would understand, so it wouldn't be so discordant. So all these little things that perhaps as an audience, you won't necessarily think about, I had to change in the script so that it would work for the new format. And then, of course, I had to shorten it. It was a 90-minute audio drama. The first cut of the film was also about an hour and a half. And I showed it to a group of filmmaker friends and they were like, it's great, but oh my goodness, it's way too long, particularly as you only have these characters essentially speaking straight to camera. There's the break session and I get them to do the dancing and the exercising and Louis goes outside. But apart from those small moments, you're looking at people who are looking directly at a screen. So if in the audio drama, there's a lot of backstory that they explain, and I had to cut all of that out for the film version. So yeah, the adaptation process had to be rigorous. And I'm lucky that I brought on a group of script advisors. So every step of the way, I would kind of say to them, can you have a look at this? Does it sound right? What would you advise? And they helped me along the way.
Yeah, your attention to detail was very spot on. How you're talking about how you had to fix the scripts just to accommodate to the little things that we have to deal with within technology. It was really seamless. And it was just it was just really entertaining to watch. It was, it was just a really good recreation of how we've all been using Zoom, like I said earlier. But at the start of the anger management session, I realized the characters were all very hesitant on participating or engaging with the positive, counselor instructor. Have you seen that a lot, or do you think that therapy isn't taken as seriously, or people don't really try as much within these African communities? Was that something that you were also trying to portray as they're telling, their vulnerable stories?
I think there's several parts to that. I think, when we were making this film, it was at the beginning of the pandemic. So none of us were that used to Zoom as a platform that we would just basically live our daily lives, And I give workshops online and attend workshops online. And, I wanted to stay true to that hesitation that people often have at the beginning of a conversation when they're on Zoom. And how if you're working in an artistic space or a therapeutic space, there's this repetition of this is a safe space, because people do kind of not want to be the first to speak, or they feel, intimidated when you can see their faces. So there was that element, which was trying to remain true to the fact that this was Zoom and a new technology for many of us. And in terms of therapy, it's funny. I'm asked quite often, therapy is not very African. Why did you set this in an anger management class? My response to that is, first of all, today, a lot of Africans go to therapy. I can tell you that a lot of my friends, both men and women, go to therapy. It's global. Of course, it is a middle class kind of thing, but people go to therapy in the Western traditional sense of having a therapist. Traditionally, we've always done therapy as well. I'm half Gambian, and when there's any kind of issue that arises in the family, it's very normal for the family to gather to discuss, what is going on, and for the elders to play that role of therapists, let's say. A lot of people find therapy in church. The reason why a lot of our people spend the whole day of Sunday in church is because it's not only therapy, but it's also a party. They're dancing and they're letting go of the stress of the week. So I don't think therapy is alien to us in any way. We've practiced it in different forms. And, Africa is part of this global world, and we also do Western therapy now, where you do it online or you go to your therapist and speak for an hour. So for me, it was never a concern. It was something that I didn't even think about until people started asking me the question.
I like that answer because, therapy comes in all different sort of forms, and it just depends on how you, retain it positively the best. And church is a big one. Church is a very big one. And you're right. There is that stereotype that, Africans don't go to church or just don't know how to express their feelings, or they're willing to express their feelings. So when they went into these whole entire monologues, it was just really great to see them dive in. And again, you do a very good job on each character and bringing attention to the effects of violence and anger, like we said earlier. Was it ever challenging wanting to bring in that comedic relief? Because it had really funny parts. So was it ever challenging bringing the comedic relief, with these heavier topics to kind of ease in at all?
I mean, I guess Jacinda, the domestic worker, and Counselor Rose are the two characters that I wrote. And when they started speaking in my head, they already spoke in this way that was quite funny, particularly Jacinda, with all her feistiness and stuff. And I always attribute that to my West African side, whereas the other writers are East African and they're a lot more poised and polite. Whereas Jacinda is like, I don't give a damn, And I'm surrounded by people like that who speak their mind. I went to school with people like that who just, would speak their mind. It wasn't deliberate, but I just felt like that this is how these characters spoke. So I didn't say, I'm going to add some comedy here, or I'm going to make a funny film. I just, and it's that magical moment that for me, I love most about doing creative work, when you give way to the characters and it's no longer you thinking, but you're hearing them in their own voices. And that is just how Jacinda spoke. Perhaps the safe space thing that Councillor Rose does, I was kind of flippantly, mocking some of the spaces I've been on online. And Louis Njoroge's reactions also are very funny, when he reacts to Jacinda. And that just came in the adaptation process. But I'm really glad that it's not a film that is just depressing, because their stories are hard. And I feel that without the humor, it would be too difficult to watch. But I also think that it's just very natural for us in our ways of expression, that even in the darkest of moments, often the way we will describe things will be funny. I just think it's something that we have in our blood. I think the difficulty did arise for me, and I had to change the script, which was this anger, message. In the original draft, it kind of ended on a very, very low note, which it kind of does still. But that's where I had to add this idea about courage, because I didn't want there to be no light at the end of the tunnel, as Councillor Rose says. I wanted people to watch this and feel, that they had learned some techniques themselves, like meditation and dancing and stuff that they can use when they're stressed, but that also that they didn't feel completely powerless to do anything about their situation, which is why it was so important for me to end with that quote, which funnily seems to emerge in quite a lot of my work and stories, that a warrior doesn't fight with anger, a warrior fights with courage. Because there are incredibly courageous people all across the continent trying to fight systems that are often very unjust and very oppressive. And I think we have to celebrate them, but also help other people to have the courage to fight the good fight and not give up.
Yeah, you've definitely put a lot of thought into this. And I was definitely going with the flow. I literally laughed out loud, especially with Jacinda. She was awesome. So it's great to hear you were principally writing her. And then I love what you said about the differences in the writers' backgrounds between East, West. People forget that although we're all one Pan-African group, that there's differences within ourselves and different people bring different things to the table. So that was awesome to watch in this unusual format. And then to dig a little deeper about your background and your company, what would you say is your primary goal and purpose for Positively African Media? And what for you does Pan-Africanism mean?
So when I started Positively African with a co-founder about 7 years ago, we were clear that we were trying to create a space of connection, a space where art would just thrive. And it didn't matter whether it was film or poetry or dance or music, but we wanted to create a space where we as artists based in Kenya could collaborate in interesting ways. So we did a number of things. We did a storytelling festival. We did 2 editions of that. And that was just so beautiful because we had storytellers from, Morocco, Sierra Leone, Jali, a kora player from Gambia, all come together. We had somebody from Australia, South Africa, come together, and really a day of fun and of stories. We did poetry jams. We did sessions with kids, taking them out into nature and doing writing workshops with them. So it was a real mixed bag of things. And it was really whatever came to the table, whatever we were working on individually as the 2 partners at the time. And then we would sort of put it under this umbrella of Positively African and as much as possible invite other artists to take part in it. At the moment, Positively African, I'm struggling with it because I've left Kenya. I've been living in Spain for a year and a half. And for me, Positively African is something that needs to exist on the African continent. So maybe it can have another rebirth in a different format here with my new life. But for now, I've kind of, said, okay, it had its 7 years. We did what we could in terms of trying to create interesting events, in the Nairobi cultural scene. And for now, it's kind of like quite dormant, to be honest. I continue to collaborate, with African artists, but more as an individual. So, for example, I have been working this year on 2 really amazing artistic residencies with artists from Kenya, Somalia, Spain, and Italy, where we've co-created new works. And it was multidisciplinary. So we had musicians and painters and performers, and then we would do a joint show together at the end. And these are really intense processes because you have 2, maximum 3 weeks to come together and create an entirely new show. So that's been really interesting. And I hope I can continue to do that. In terms of Pan-Africanism, what it means to me, I was very lucky that I grew up with a great Pan-Africanist. My father was a self-proclaimed, self-defined Pan-Africanist. He actually, born in Gambia, managed to get a scholarship to study in Ghana, thanks to Kwame Nkrumah, the godfather of Pan-Africanism, if I may say so. And in our house, out of sort of 9 out of 10 books on a bookshelf would be by Nkrumah. I didn't even know he had that many books, but he was just such an Nkrumahist and a Pan-Africanist. And he was a linguist, and he was studying in Ghana, and then he was sent to Spain to study Spanish, which is where he met my mother. But even when he was here, he was very clear that he had to be part of that generation of Africans who, post-independence, would rebuild the continent. And he lived in Togo and in Gambia, all his life. Had a very, very interesting role because as an interpreter, he was a fly on the wall to many, many interesting, significant political events. So things like the Charles Taylor trial, things like Gaddafi, when, the African Union group went and to ask him to step down. So he saw over a 40-year period as an interpreter how that dream of Pan-Africanism slowly disintegrated. And from the discussions we talked a lot. He passed away sadly 4 years ago. We'd talk a lot, and the friends of his that would come to the house, they were all these Pan-Africanists, and they were like, Africa must unite, and we must make sure that, we have African solutions for African problems. Those were the mantras that I grew up around. And I did watch how sort of disillusion set in when, the dream wasn't realized. And instead, we were overtaken by very despotic, self-serving regimes. Nevertheless, having said that, I do still believe, that as Black people across the world, so not just on the African continent, but in Europe, in the US, in South America, there are Black communities, and there's something that links us together. That ancestry, that root has the potential to be so powerful in terms of making us stand up for the injustices that we face. In fact, quite a bit of my storytelling is around this. When I look at the police brutality in the US and you see Black men and women being killed by the police, I question the silence that we Africans respond with, and vice versa. There seems to be such a lack of unity, which wasn't always the case. In the 60s, in the 70s, even early 80s, there was a lot more movement between us, a lot more supporting our political revolutionaries, and we have lost a lot of that. But I also do think that through arts, through music, through film, that people are reconnecting. And it's important because I think there are bubbles of us doing work that is about justice and about Black joy and Black experience and Black excellence all over the world, but we're disconnected. And I think that's where the Pan-African dream, we need to still strive for it and use technology, today to find a way to connect us so that your oppression is my oppression and that we can fight these battles together.
Yeah, I totally agree. What, if you have any, what are your future plans? I know that you said positively African media is a little dormant right now, but you also mentioned how you're working on 2 projects. Yeah, is there anything else that's in the works or in the pipeline that you can share with us?
So for 2023, now that I'm based in Spain, there's a one-woman monologue that I've been doing for a few years, which is based on Lola Shonean's novel, The Secret Lives of Baba Segi's Wives. So I've adapted that into Spanish. So my plan for 2023 is to try and, show that work in theaters in this country. For me, it's important to bring what is a very African story to this audience here, because a lot of the time, as Black people in the diaspora, the only conversation people want to have with us is about racism, which is a very important conversation to have, but it's not the only conversation to have. I want to celebrate other stories and celebrate my culture and get other people to, know that, this magnificent continent of 54 countries and so much to offer, let us not be reduced to somebody else's narrative. So my plan is to do that. I'm writing this year as well. I have an idea for a film and I've been working on that. I just find myself in a very odd position, to be honest, because now that I'm living in Spain, I don't qualify for any African grants. And yet none of my work is linked to Spain necessarily. So I don't qualify for any grants here either. So this is what I talk about, part of that Pan-Africanism, that we need to support each other's work, regardless of where we are, because, we can't wait for Norway to say, this is a valid proposal, and we have depended on them for a long time. So it's not to bite the hand that has fed a lot of us, but that's not the future. And actually, one of the proposals of the projects that I had written for next year was to do an artist residency in Senegal with people from the Black diaspora. So with artists from North America, South America, Europe, and the African continent, 20 of us together co-creating a new work of art. Unfortunately, I didn't get any funding. So it's one of those things that remains on my laptop. And, with this work, one thing that I've realized is you have to also trust in divine timing. And I have no doubt that the right time, the right people to do this with will come along. So I'm creating, writing, running workshops, performing. Yeah, those are my plans.
And for the actual film, The Accidental City, is that available for our audience to tap into anywhere? And this is also an opportunity for you to list, any kind of even personal fun facts or social media links, website information, any kind of anything really now.
Okay. Well, the film is still doing the festival round. I can't believe it. I never imagined that there would be so much interest. So in April, we'll be showing it at the Vue d'Afrique Film Festival in Montreal, which is, I think, the oldest running African film festival in Canada. And we're still trying to get it distributed on a platform like Showmax or something like that, but we still haven't sorted that out yet. So once that is out, then people will be able to see it through these platforms, but it's not currently available online, whilst we still do festivals. And yeah, if you'd like to follow me or my work, it's just my name, Maimouna, Maimouna.Jallow, Jallow, on Instagram and Facebook. I don't do Twitter. It's just too much noise. I do LinkedIn though as well for all the serious people. But yeah, and as you know, with this work, you have to end up becoming your own publicist, which can be quite hard. So I basically post whatever I do on those platforms. So if you're in Spain, watch out for, performances of The Secret Lives of Baba Segui's Wives, which is translated to Las Vidas Secretas de las Esposas de Baba Segui. And yeah.
Do you want to give our audience who maybe doesn't know who Baba Segui was, like a little brief description?
Yeah. So it's a novel. It's a fictional novel, as I mentioned, written by Lola Shoneyin, who is also the director of the Ake Festival. She is a real mover and shaker on the continent in terms of the literary scene. And this was her first novel. She's also a poet. And it's a story of a patriarch, Baba Segui, and he has 4 wives, but the 4th wife isn't getting pregnant, and he wants to find out why. So in my performance, what I do is I embody each of the 4 wives and tell their story in the first person. And then by the end, I won't spoil it, go and buy the book. By the end, you find out what's happening in this family. But again, it's one of those books that when I read, the way Lola writes is really so musical. You can hear the characters speaking. And because I was exploring sort of storytelling, performance storytelling, I was just drawn to the book and decided to adapt it for the stage. Yeah. But yeah, follow Lola Shoneyin as well. Ake Festival, if you're interested in literature, it's an absolutely brilliant festival that happens in Nigeria every year around October, November. And yeah.
Awesome.
And another one. Thanks again for tuning in to another episode of the Pan-African Film Podcast. We are now on Spotify and Instagram. Just search Pan-African Film Podcast to follow and like us there. Our new platform is 360 Africa. That's 360 Africa. And we want to thank our Kenyan Vibe partners. Shout out to the KV Squad. Last but not least, we thank our editor Ace. Please send us your feedback, like, follow, and comment.